I mean, one of the big issues that we've had is that there's a lot of interest in the hospitals transformation programme, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. So we've deliberately kept the presentation while we're on transmit mode as short as it can be to get the information to you. But then there will be plenty of time to ask questions, and both Chris and Ed will be able to do that. With your forbearance, could we leave the questions to the end? Oh, Graham, can I ask you to go on to mute, please? Thank you. We will leave the questions to after the presentation, because your question may be addressed by a later slide in the presentation. So, but if you want to put something in the chat as a reminder, we will come to that at the end of the session, and we'll take them in order, and then we'll take questions either by raising your hand or by putting a question in the chat. This is different from a board meeting, because board meetings are meetings in public. They are not public meetings, and this is actually even more than a public meeting. This is a meeting for the public, because this is what you've asked us to present to you, that you want more information. We've dedicated our quarterly meeting, which is a 2-hour meeting rather than a 1-hour meeting, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all of the questions that you may have. And I think I will stop eating into this time, and I will hand over to Chris. So, Chris.
Hi, thank you, Julia. And as I said earlier, it's great to be joining you today and having this conversation. So this is what we're going to be just running through very briefly. So this is to sort of lead in, I guess, and give an overview of where we're at the moment, and may then lead to some questions which we'll take, as Julia said, after the presentation. So if we move on to the next slide. Thank you. So the first thing, I think, the first observation we'd all have is this has been a highly protracted process. It's taken a long period of time. Part of it's out with the trusts and even the local health systems control, and you can see some of those things listed down there. And in the last year, there's also been a significant impact from COVID, and a lot of the team, the project team, but also, in fact, the people across the trust, people that we need to be involved in the development of this programme, have been redirected onto more urgent priorities. So over the last year, that has also caused a significant impact. As the impact of COVID is now reducing for the trust, we are now refocusing our efforts and our attention towards the acceleration of this programme. So if we move on to the next slide, this slide just gives a flavour again of what we have discussed, or what's been discussed previously around the proposed site reconfiguration that came out of the Future Fit consultation. And this, if I just remind people, this is really to address significant deficiencies in our urgent and emergency care facilities. It isn't that they aren't geared up to cater for existing or future demand. They've got poor clinical adjacencies. That's impacting the sustainability of the workforce and our ability to attract ED consultants and middle grade doctors in particular. And it's impacting clinical outcomes for patients, operational performance, and is not giving the right patient experience. So that was the primary driver around the consultation that was undertaken. How do we address that issue and give ourselves something that is appropriate as we go forward? There were also deficiencies in our planned care facilities. Partly those deficiencies are linked to the urgent and emergency care challenges, because what happens because of our urgent emergency care position, what happens is the planned care services tend to get displaced for large parts of the year or moved around the site. That isn't ideal. We've also got a number of split site operations for a few of those planned care areas as well, and that just increases again the workforce fragility in a number of those areas and makes it difficult for us to attract the right calibre of people and the right number of people into the trust. And then the other bit that's talked about at the bottom, really important, is that we also work with our partners to improve the integration of pathways. and particularly a couple of areas there, particularly important, the frail and elderly and the members of the population with long-term conditions. If we have better integration of services and more prevention, that then takes some of the pressure away from the acute hospital. So the future fit consultation essentially was trying to address some of those issues, and this was the proposed split of services then, or rationalisation of services across the two sites that we have at Shrewsbury and Telford. If we move on to the next slide, I think there's a couple of slides then. These slides just give a summary of some of the benefits, and I'll just let you sort of read through those. I think in the clinical quality and safety, I've touched on a number of those, but yeah, the services and care closer to home. The last point, really important, that we don't just see this as an acute hospital transformation. It is a care transformation across the health system, of which acute, the acute part of the care is an integral element, but isn't the only element that we need to address. The patient experience, really important that we streamline the care and ultimately reduce the amount of time people need to stay in hospital, and that's partly about the quality of the care we provide in the hospital, but also then that linkage with partner organisations. You move on to the next slide, some more benefits there. I've mentioned a number of the workforce challenges, and then the changes that we're planning here will transform the way that the people we're trying to attract into the organisation see the organisation and see their roles in the organisation. And ultimately, all of these things do help to improve efficiencies, and ultimately will give us a more efficient and effective services, which should allow us then to put that resource back into the services and expand the services in other areas. So that's what we're hoping we'll get out of the solution. If we move on to the next slide, this just gives a bit of an artist impression of how the look and feel of the site at Telford will be transformed, and what we're looking for there is a modern, fit-for-purpose planned care centre that is welcoming, has got and has better patient facilities within it. If we move on to the next slide, this then just looks at one of the changes that we'll be making in the planned care site, and part of the development is to increase our day case and our theatre capacity, and to improve the quality of our theatre capacity. And the aim within the planned care site then is to deliver the care when it's scheduled for patients, which will significantly improve patient experience, and one of the key metrics around that is reducing the number of cancellations that we have to make. And then you can see some other benefits, I think, listed down there. So the infection prevention and control, particularly important, as we've seen with during the recent pandemic. If we move on to the next slide, this slide just gives an artist impression of the new emergency floor that we're aiming to construct on the Shrewsbury site, and that will provide better clinical adjacencies, much better patient flow. I'm just getting a bit of feedback there.
Lynn, I think you've just joined. Could you switch your microphone off, please, because we get feedback otherwise. Thank you.
Much better patient flow, and that really helps them with the amount of time people spend in the department before they end up in a bed or are discharged, and does have a significant impact then on the outcomes, so they get better outcomes, particularly important for the frail and elderly. And this will also incorporate the integration of observation areas that support the same day emergency care services that we also need. So how do we manage those patients and give better patients are then seen by the right person in the right place at the right time. If we then move on to the next slide, this just highlights then on a site map some of the changes on the Shrewsbury site, and what you can see in the largest, are they pink? I think they're pink or red, depending on the people think, but the largest circle is the new build incorporating the emergency floor, and it will have critical care sat above it, and it will also have women's and children's services adjacent to it. And that's the most significant part of the change that's planned for the emergency care services. There's a couple of things that are mentioned at the bottom: the potential land sale and the proposed demolition of the Copthorne building. Those items are being re-examined as we finalise the strategic outline case, as we'll come on to in a minute, and we'll then make a decision on those in due course. So if I just move on to sort of recent progress, as I mentioned at the start, we're now really starting to pick up the pace and refocus a number of people and partner organisations onto the challenge that we need to address to get this programme moving and then delivered. One of those is around the governance arrangements in place, and what we've changed there is this was much more of a individual trust driven stream of work, and we've just repositioned that back into the system, the health system, and we've also incorporated the partners that we need around the table to support the delivery of the wider outcomes of the Future Fit consultation that were described. So they all attend the programme board, and we're talking about chief executives and things here to hold to account for their elements of the delivery of the changes in the models of care, both in and out of hospital. We've also recently appointed an external delivery partner to help us accelerate the delivery of the strategic outline case and get it approved. That's PA Consulting, and they were appointed at the start of June and are working with all of those partners that I just mentioned to understand what they need to deliver and to help them get that work done in a timely fashion over the next coming few months. And some of the key focus areas that we've been looking at most recently are the acceleration of the acute pathways, and the original draft strategic outline case that was developed had all of the infrastructure work happening, and then basically at the end we got the benefits. And people tend to think of those as a big bangs type of implementation. So basically we do a lot of development, then get to the end, and then that's when we get the benefits. One of the things that as we'll see in a moment is some time away, and given our pressing challenges in some of the areas around the quality of care that we're currently providing, one of the things that we are tasking ourselves with is to say, well, what could we accelerate, what could we bring forward and deliver at an earlier point, and then do a more staged development that enables us to bring some of the benefits forward and then still get to the full solution in due course. I've mentioned the work we're doing on the local care pathways. So Patricia Davis, the new chief executive of the Community Trust, is leading on that work, and that's about how we then harness primary and community care and link that in with the acute part of a patient's pathway to provide a seamless integrated approach. And then the other bit we're doing a lot of work on with the system is around the system long-term plan, and that's something that must champion and fully incorporate all aspects of the hospital's transformation programme. So the implications and the programmes of work that we're talking about need to feature in that system long-term plan as key components. We move on to the next slide. So then on the next couple of slides, we just go through a couple of the key challenges that we need to address in the development of the strategic outline case. One of them we talked about, or I talked about at the last board meeting, is about addressing the affordability challenge, and that links in with the increase in the capital cost of the scheme from 312 million to 533 million. I'll come on to a little bit more about that on the next slide, and just unpack how that's arrived. But that's one of the things we that then links in with the point I was just making about the long-term plan and understanding where that capital. So what is the most efficient and effective way of delivering the outputs from the consultation, and what does that cost? And then how do we source that funding and make sure it's integrated within the system long-term plan? So that's the challenge. One of the challenges as we go through the outline case that we need to resolve. Linked to that is a common set of core system assumptions, and we were having a conversation about that yesterday in the sustainability committee for the system. And this is about looking then at the demographic growth that we'll be facing as we go forward, and in fact the changing case mix, so the change in the profile of those of that population as we go forward, and therefore the impact on acute services, and also what the impact we think we can have by bringing care closer to home and really leveraging our community services much more. And that's what the last one, the community shift assumptions, also feed into. So we're challenging each of those areas, and that's one of the things we need to reach a conclusion on, and provide a clear statement in the strategic outline case. If we move on to the next slide. So this just talks about how we arrived at the change in the affordability, and what you can see there is and I think I mentioned this at the last board, the change in the indices, the inflation indices that we're required to use, which are government produced inflation indices. And you can see therefore when we did the first stock in 2016, in actual fact the index went down. We didn't actually put that decrease into the SOC. We left it essentially at the level in 2016. So you can see therefore the financial number is the same in 2016 as 2019. When we redid the SOC in 2019, what you can see therefore is for the equivalent amount of 312 million, what that index then did based on the estimated timelines for delivery at that point, which was the midpoint was around 2022, and you can see the extrapolation of the index forward and what we were therefore required to include in that strategic outline case. And then a couple of other changes also happened, a few national design changes. So these tend to come from the Department of Health or NHSE around required changes or improvements that need to be made in all organisations to different services, and you can see a number of those listed there. The accounting legislation or rules also changed, which meant that a couple of items, including the car park and the energy centre, that we had were going to get third parties to operate. Unfortunately, because of the accounting changes, meant we had to count that as capital rather than off balance sheet, if you like. And that meant therefore, even though the overall cost of the scheme hadn't actually changed, so what we were going to do is still the same, it actually needed to be counted within the capital envelope or the capital number. So that added 28 million to the capital cost. And then we also were asked to, we had a couple of bits of feedback on the 16 draft SOC, partly around estates utilisation and linked to the Copthorne. And that resulted in us coming up with some options of how we dealt with that, which was to refurbish some of the unused ward areas. And in fact, that ended up with a proposal to demolish the Copthorne building, both of which added a proportion of that 35 million to the cost. If we move on to the next slide. And then these are a couple of the other things I've mentioned. I won't mention again the accelerating the delivery of HTP, but that is an important component of what we need to do. So how can we try and deliver improved services as quickly as possible? And we need to challenge ourselves on that. And then the second point builds on then the governance arrangements that I talked about earlier that we put in place, and it's really embedding that accountability and ownership for delivery, which then needs to continue throughout the programme into the fabric of each of those partner organisations. And so that is also, we need to describe how that's going to happen in the strategic outline case and make sure that then does happen as we go forward into the future stages. If we go on to the next slide then. And then this just gives a brief outline of the timelines. And you'll see there the finalisation of the SOC, which we talked about, which we're hoping to conclude relatively quickly, because we've obviously been through the process a few times. So we do need to finalise that and address those issues that I mentioned. And then, subject to successful approval, we can then progress with the next stage. And we need NHSEI's approval to do that. And then we can go on to the OBC, and again the same thing will apply at the end of that stage. We need approval again to go to the FBC, and then once we've done the FBC, we can commence and complete. We can go into the commence and complete construction, and with the acceleration work, that will partly impact that. So if we do come up with some compelling reasons about how we can bring forward some of the work, that will change the profile of how that construction phase looks.